This is lesson 6.7, example 2, and we're going to be going over how we can switch between or translate between recursive and explicit definitions of a geometric sequence. So the recursive definition we already talked about in example 1. Remember, the recursive definition is the one that relies on the term before it in order to move on in the sequence. Now the explicit definition uses the same pieces, so we can still see A1, which is our first term, and we can still see our ratio present. So as long as we have our first term and our ratio, the explicit definition will give us any term in the sequence, regardless of whether or not we know the one before it. So problem A says, given the recursive definition, what is the explicit definition? So for A, we're going from recursive to explicit, R to E. So the big pieces we need, like I said, we need A sub 1, and we need our ratio. And once we have A sub 1 and once we have our ratio, we can write either of our formulas. So looking at the recursive definition, n equals 1 indicates the first term, so our A sub 1 equals 5, and our ratio is used with every other term following it, so our ratio is 1/2. So in order to write my explicit definition, I'm going to say A sub n equals A sub 1, which is 5, times my ratio, which is 1/2, raised to the power of n minus 1. For example B, it says, given the explicit definition, what is the recursive? So we're going the opposite way. Given explicit, find the recursive. So again, we're going to need to identify our first term and our ratio. So looking at the explicit definition, our first term is going to be the one without the exponent, so that would be 3. And our ratio is going to be the one raised to the exponent, so that is 2. So to write my recursive formula, I say A sub n equals, and then we have this bracket, our first term, which is 3, when n is equal to 1, which just tells us that it's our first term. And every other term can be found by saying 2 times the previous term. So that's for every term after the first term. So go ahead and practice translating between recursive and explicit definitions. That's page 166 in your workbook, problem number 2.